An Unlikely Lent, Extraordinary People of the Easter Story by Rachel Billups. This is Chapter 2, Unlikely Opposition, the Servant Girl, pages 21 through 31. While Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the female servants of the high priest came by. When she saw Peter warming himself, she stared at him and said, "You also were with Jesus, the man from Nazareth." Mark chapter 14, verses 66 and 67. Sometimes when I explore people in the Bible, I discover pages of research because scholars consider their contribution to the divine narrative noteworthy. And then there are people like the servant girl, unnamed and yet vital to the tension in the passion. Especially regarding Peter, the servant girl plays a pivotal role in helping the reader understand what's at stake in Jesus' trial. As I approached this character, I began to imagine her role in a very different light, and invite you to do the same. I have always understood the servant girl to be a source of opposition in Peter's life, and therefore a less than good player in the Passion story. Now, I have come to reconsider my perspective and invite you to do the same. I was determined to soak up some January sunshine, despite the extremely low temperatures, so I set out to explore the wonder of Old Man's Cave in Cedar Falls. Old Man's Cave and Cedar Falls are in the heart of a region called the Hocking Hills, near Logan, Ohio. Massive cave and rock formations seem to be dropped into the middle of an ever-expanding forest. Reader, it is a piece of heaven. The round-trip hike is nearly 6 miles, and I completely underestimated how long it would take to trek through over 10 inches of snow. But let me tell you, the hike was worth every frigid step. I stood in awe of the icicles that towered above me on the edges of the cliffs. I breathed deep of the crisp, cool air and the sun that sparkled off the brilliant white snow. Although there were a few footprints in the fresh snow, I nearly felt bad for disrupting the beauty with each of my steps. Have you ever walked through deep snow? It's kind of like trekking through the sand on the beach. So by the time I made it to the halfway point, Cedar Falls, I was winded, tired, and ready to be done. On my return trip to Old Man's Cave, I popped in an earbud and listened to Father Gregory Boyle's latest book, Cherished Belonging. As Father Boyle spoke about the boundless love of God, how everyone belongs to God and to one another, I could not help wanting to clap back with a resounding, "No way, Father Boyle, not everybody." I could feel the tension rising in my body. I thought to myself, what about the people who seem bent on destruction? What about those with little regard for the most vulnerable? I am not so sure that we can categorically believe that everyone belongs. Not in the world we are living in now. I know there are some people I just do not want in my circle of belonging. People who have been acting foolish on social media. People claiming so-called biblical truths that have nothing to do with the Bible. I was arguing with everyone and no one in particular while surrounded by the majesty of that winter wonderland. And, reader, my heart grew as frosty as my surroundings. Perhaps you too have found yourself in similar situations. Whether that's because you've been scrolling through social media, watching your news source of choice, or attempting to make sense of the senseless world we find ourselves in. You too have said to everyone, and no one in particular, no way, not everyone can possibly be in the circle of belonging. These are tense times and intense times. And when people experience tension, humans tend to say and do things that are beyond the divine identity they have claimed for themselves. For example, sometimes I find myself asking, "Rachel, what has got a hold of you?" There have been moments I find myself posting, deleting, and nearly reposting less than thoughtful comments on people's social media posts. I'm tempted to be a keyboard warrior In that moment, I want to put people in their place, and somehow I believe that I will set the world right with my words. I want to help the person who is posting understand just how wrong they are with what they have posted for the whole world to see. And then, what, Rachel? Will they repent of their dubious ways and return to some form of sanity? Or am I merely attempting to make myself feel better when I do not know what else to do? Tense times. In tense times, humans do strange things. It seems to be what was happening in the Gospel of Mark. The situation was tense. Jesus had just been arrested. He was outed by one of his own, Judas, with an intimate kiss on the cheek. The chief priests, elders, scribes, and accompanying mob arrived carrying clubs and swords. And once Jesus was in the possession of the powers that be, someone, apparently Peter, drew a sword and took off the ear of the high priest's slave. Jesus stopped the violence with his words, but the disciples ran like hell. It's an emergency because the gospel writer Mark outs himself as having to run away naked. No reasonable Jewish man is going to run naked through the streets. Running naked would be a form of social self-annihilation, and yet Mark was presumably running for his life. They all ran, refusing to be captured by the temple guards. Alone and abandoned, Jesus was led to stand trial before the Sanhedrin, led by the chief priest. Where were his disciples now? They could have been there to advocate on Jesus' behalf. The disciples had spent several years with this Jesus of Nazareth and experienced their fair share of run-ins with the religious and political powers of the day. So why run now? The times are so tense that the only perceived choice they had was to run. It's as if we are watching a movie on a large screen and the director takes a wide lens view, when suddenly near the edge of the screen we witness the disciple Peter watching the drama from a distance. Peter was the peak, speak first, think later disciple, but if he was anything, Peter was a man of action. Peter likely believed that he needed to do something, but what? Perhaps Peter can give us a clue. While Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the female servants of the high priest came by. When she saw Peter warming himself, she stared at him and said, "You also were with Jesus, the man from Nazareth." But he denied it, saying, "I do not know or understand what you are talking about." And he went out into the forecourt. Then the cock crowed. Mark chapter 14, verses 66 through 72. Nobody wants to die. It should not surprise us that Peter, when confronted by one of the female servants of the high priest, chose self-preservation, as did all the disciples in the garden. Jesus was clearly thought to be a threat to religious stability and political peace. Jesus was to be tried as some sort of religious rebel, and Peter was well aware of what happens to those who find themselves in these situations. Jesus has caught the attention of the high priest, named in the Gospels of Matthew and John as Caiaphas. Then the chief priests and the elders of the people gathered in the courtyard of the high priest, who was called Caiaphas, and they conspired to arrest Jesus by stealth and kill him. Matthew chapter 26, verses 3 and 4. So the chief priests and the Pharisees called a meeting of the council and said, "What are we to do? This man is performing many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and destroy both our holy place and our nation." But one of them, Caiaphas, who was high priest that year, said to them, "You know nothing at all." John chapter 11, verses 47 through 49. Caiaphas was not a high priest to be trifled with. He knew the name of the game. In a world where the Roman Empire flexed its power over every territory, including Judea, Caiaphas played his role well. More than just a religious leader, Caiaphas was a political operator, keeping the fragile peace between Rome and the Jewish people. He managed to maintain Jewish religious traditions while also making sure the temple system, its sacrifices, its offerings, and its money, kept going and flowing. More than a place of worship, the temple was an economic engine. For example, the temple tax, an annual contribution to the Second Temple in Jerusalem, would have cost every male above the age of 20 about 2 days' wages, a significant amount of money for a family in antiquity. Money, grain, and sacrifices were placed and processed in and through this system. and Caiaphas was the operator of the entire enterprise. Caiaphas ensured that the temple system all ran smoothly. Caiaphas held the position and power for nearly 2 decades. His longevity was an impressive feat in a time when high priest came and went at Rome's whim. Caiaphas was loyal to the system. He was committed to preserving stability, but stability often comes at a cost. And this time, that cost, in Caiaphas's eyes, was Jesus. This traveling street teacher from Galilee was disrupting everything. Jesus flipped treasury tables, called out hypocrisy, and stirred up messianic hopes that could all turn dangerous. A revolution was not a mere theological debate. A revolution was a direct threat to the order Caiaphas fought to maintain. So, when Jesus was arrested and dragged before him, Caiaphas was not searching for truth. Caiaphas was not interested in whether Jesus was who he said he was. Caiaphas was looking for a way to shut Jesus down. In Mark's gospel, Jesus remained silent as the accusations piled up. Silent in the face of corruption, silent in the face of power. Until Caiaphas finally asked the damning question, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" Mark chapter 14, verse 61. And that's when Jesus spoke, "I am." And with those words, Jesus declares something bigger than any religious system or any political power. He claims his identity as the one who counts the stars. With that one statement, "I am," reader, we are taken back to Exodus and Moses' question. If I come to the Israelites and say to them, "The God of your ancestors has sent me to you," and they ask me, "What is his name?" what shall I say to them? God said to Moses, "I am who I am." He said further, "Thus you shall say to the Israelites, 'I am has sent me to you.'" Exodus chapter 3, verses 13 and 14. Caiaphas heard Jesus' claim to be one with God and tore his clothes in protest. Jesus was more than a dangerous rebel in Caiaphas' eyes. He was claiming to be the Son of God. Meanwhile, just outside, Peter was warming himself by the fire. Close enough to hear, close enough to see, but not close enough to stand with Jesus. Imagining the scene is almost too much to take in. Inside Caiaphas' house, Jesus was expressing and embracing the truth of who he is, and outside Peter, his closest disciple, was denying him, determined not to lose his own life. When we were traveling to the Holy Land, our small group decided to make our way to the Church of St. Peter in Gallicantu. There are roosters everywhere. I cannot help smiling when I see a picture of a rooster. My Uncle Mick was obsessed with roosters and chickens. My little sister and I nearly had one tattooed on our bodies, but we came to our senses. When we stepped into what was thought to be the courtyard, I noticed it. A sculpture of Peter, a Roman soldier, the servant girls, 2 girls in the sculpture, and a rooster. I've always been drawn to this story, and somehow standing in what would have been the vicinity of that courtyard made me nearly emotional. Could I smell fires burning in the distance? What would this have looked like at night? There was no way that Peter was thinking clearly. Motivated by gut reactions, Peter had the courage to follow, to be nearly present for Jesus. It's just that when he came face to face with opposition, Peter seemed to cave. Peter did not want to die. Self-preservation is an extremely human response. We witness this kind of action from the beginning of the story of God's people. First, Abraham, when threatened by Pharaoh, determined to pretend his wife was his sister. It was horrific and potentially jeopardized his wife's safety. I struggle with this practice. Although I understand this need for self-preservation, I cannot fathom this at the expense of his wife. Now there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to live there for a while because the famine was severe. As he was about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife Sarai, "I know what a beautiful woman you are. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, 'This is his wife.' Then they will kill me, but will let you live. Say you are my sister, so that I will be treated well for your sake, and my life will be spared because of you." Genesis chapter 12, verses 10 through 13. The practice did not cease with Abraham. His son Isaac did the same with his wife Rebekah, only this time the leader was Abimelech, king of the Philistines. When the men of that place asked him about his wife, he said, "She's my sister," because he was afraid to say, "She is my wife." He thought, "The men of this place might kill me on account of Rebekah, because she is beautiful." Genesis chapter 26, verse 7. In each case, these women seem protected by God's presence, even in the middle of a disturbing situation. These Old Testament patriarchs were attempting to stay alive, even if it meant harm to the women who'd held the promise of God in their wombs. Most humans tend to self-preserve. I remember my 7th grade algebra class. I was a disruptive student. Yours truly was quite the talker. I know you are shocked. But I was never blamed for my disruptions. There was another girl in the class, my bestie, known for her troublemaking ways. The teacher always called her out for my disruptions. At first I was relieved. I could not believe my good fortune. I thought I had gotten away with it. But after several weeks of the teacher misconstruing the situation, I couldn't take the guilt. I confessed to my math teacher, "I am the disruptor, not my best friend." Mr. Math Teacher was not angry with me, but rather commended me for my honesty, and he continued to punish my bestie even though she was innocent. People get blamed for stuff they do not do. They are reprimanded for acts they did not commit, and sometimes humans just kind of let that go. We are just bent towards self-preservation. Think about it. It's when the car behind us gets pulled over, even though we have been both speeding. It's that time when your sibling took the blame for the cookies that turned up missing, or maybe even when coworkers get reprimanded for the mess you have made in the break room microwave. In those moments, it is easy to stay silent. Just count your lucky stars and keep your mouth shut. But what about when the stakes are higher? When people remain silent in the face of injustice, they contribute to a culture of complicity that allows harm to persist. Consider the colleague who misused the corporate credit card for personal expenses. Perhaps others in the office notice but choose to look the other way. They fear professional consequences or simply assume it is not their place to intervene. What about the moment a friend's child shows signs of abuse, bruises hidden beneath sleeves, a fearful demeanor, or troubling stories that do not add up? People might hesitate to speak out, uncertain of the full picture or worried about the repercussions of getting involved. This silence extends beyond personal relationships into the political sphere, where people often refrain from challenging policies that harm marginalized communities, whether through systemic racism, economic exploitation, or restrictive laws that strip individuals of their rights. Whether motivated by fear, indifference, or self-preservation, remaining silent in those moments not only enables harm, but also makes bystanders complicit in injustice. Our temptation is just to live our lives, do our jobs, and keep our heads down. We don't want to take the risk. That's Peter. And even though we have speculations concerning where the other 11 disciples might be, here's Peter warming himself by that fire, being defensive, quick to correct any opposition to his self-preservation. When the servant girl saw Peter warming himself, she stared at him and said, "You also were with Jesus, the man from Nazareth." But he denied it, saying, "I do not know or understand what you are talking about." And he went out into the forecourt. Then the cock crowed, and the female servant, on seeing him, began again to say to the bystanders, "This man is one of them." But again he denied it. Mark chapter 14, verses 67 through 70. Peter is in a real pickle. Someone has confronted him with his very own identity. "Peter, you are a follower of this Jesus of Nazareth." But who is this person who confronted Peter? So often I have assumed that she was merely an instrument of the temple. The servant girl was an extension of Caiaphas and his agenda. But what if we reconsidered the role this servant girl played not only in Peter's life, but also in ours? Could it be that this woman wanted Peter to take a risk? Not to humiliate Peter, but rather to smoke the rebel Peter out? Did the servant girl urge him to rise to his fullest potential as an advocate for Jesus?